Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's University Scholar Series. Really excited to have Dr. Kristen Rebmann from the School of Information here. But before we begin, we always start our University Scholar Series with our land acknowledgement.
While we gather at San Jose State University, we are gathered on the ethno-historic tribal territory of Rebmann Ohlone, who were direct ancestors of the lineages enrolled in the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, and who were missionized into Mission Santa Clara, San Jose, and Dolores, the lands on which San Jose State University is established and continues to be of significance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. We also recognize that the ancestors of the Muwekma Ohlone constructed and maintained the 3 Bay Area missions. Our campus extends to surrounding areas that held Tupentaka Traditional Roadhouse, which were once located at the historic Lope Ñigo Nangrant Rancho Pozolmi y Positas de las Animas, Little Wells of Souls, and also Marcelo, Pio, and Cristobal's land grant Rancho Ulistac, which were places of celebration and religious ceremonies, as well as nearby ancestral heritage shell mounds that served as the tribe's traditional cemetery sites and territorial monuments. San Jose State University also desires to honor the military service of the Muwekma men and women who have honorably served overseas during World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, and who are still serving in the United Armed Forces today. Thank you.
So before we jump in, a couple of quick announcements and practical issues. Live captioning is enabled. You can hit the CC button, and we are recording the webinar so that it can be posted later for those who might not be able to make it. I also encourage you to ask questions throughout. Please use the Q&A function. Don't use the chat function, and I'll be monitoring those and helping the speaker manage through some of those questions after the presentation is done. With that, I also want to be able to thank and acknowledge all the parts of the organization that have stepped in to support this event today, which includes all the people in the Office of the Provost that work with all the amazing folks in the King Library to put this event together, as well as support from the Spartan Bookstore, the Division of Research and Innovation, and the School of Information. So with that, I want to turn now to a brief introduction of our speaker today, and I'm really excited to hear from Dr. Radsliff Rebmann about equity-focused data analytics for libraries. For those who don't know our speaker, started with a degree, a Bachelor of Science degree in biology with a minor in chemistry at University of St. Joseph in Connecticut, found her way into the Master of Library and Information Science program here at San Jose State, and eventually completed a PhD in communication in 2007 from UC San Diego. And in and of itself, I'm curious to hear how that trajectory emerged. It's just a really interesting story. From a research and teaching perspective, Dr. Radsliff Rebmann works on issues related to equity, diversity, and inclusion practices, and thinking about the important ways in which libraries play a critical role in that work. She has been successful in over $700,000 worth of scholar grants and contracts. She advanced to the rank of full professor in 2019, and she's worked on a number of amazing projects, including 2 recent ones, federal ones, the first of which she's collaborating with people at Harvard, Berkeley, Kent State, and some corporate partners. The first one, planning neural systems and inclusion-focused MOOCs and guides, and a second one on implementation of an equity-fluent leaders language clearinghouse for librarianship, data analytics, and archival science. With that, it is very exciting for me to introduce our speaker and turn it over to her so that she can engage us in a deeper conversation about equity-focused data analytics for libraries. So thank you for doing this today. Really appreciate it.
Wow, what a welcome. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully everyone can see my presentation here, my little prezi here. And so we'll go ahead and get started. I had my own little land acknowledgement, which is really about, sovereignty and respecting sovereignty in our communities. I also wanted to acknowledge the sovereignty of the Ukrainian nation and the people there, and just to acknowledge what they're experiencing and those geopolitical challenges. And so that's something that's the forefront of my mind and others as well. I also want to, just as Provost Del Casino said in his wonderful introduction, I just want to acknowledge the RISCA Advisory Council. I want to acknowledge his work, the Office of Research Faculty Affairs, the University Library, the RISCA Advisory Council, and the bookstore that makes these types of events happen that really enrich our community. So thank you to all of them for the invitation and for making these events happen. So today I just want to talk a little bit about myself. And we'll be talking more about equity-focused data analytics. We'll use a recent project of mine as a springboard to enter into that conversation. We'll talk about TV Whitespace, which is a new networking technology that I've been deploying for the past, I would say, since 2016. I started working on related projects. We'll talk about the intersection of TV Whitespace technology and libraries, and some of the obstacles that we face that have created a context where data analytics is a relevant approach to just addressing some challenges that have emerged. Then I'll talk more about data storytelling and how projects like the TV Whitespace project and other data-focused and equity-focused projects can help libraries accomplish their missions and their goals, and how data storytelling is part of that. And then we'll just use, we'll talk about a couple of other projects that I'm excited about, and new directions that I think libraries can go in as they tell their own data story. So let's go ahead and just jump in. A little bit about me. I probably don't even need to say any more. Dr. Provost Del Casino said so many nice things about me, but I'm actually from San Diego. I come from a Navy family, and I'm a multi-ethnic person. So I have early experiences with being a multi-ethnic, multiracial person in California a long time ago. And so that really has informed a lot of my professional and personal experiences and perspectives on things. I was a library kid. I was one of those kids that had a dad who would actually take them to the library multiple times per week. My dad, he's older now. He has Parkinson's, and he is really facing a lot of challenges with that. And that's been something that I've had to face. I know many of you out there are also facing similar challenges. But yeah, my dad was great, took me to the library, and librarians were some of the first people that inspired me and really helped to shape my career. I was a student athlete, so I really enjoy athletics. I was a volleyball player in college, but my first trade was actually not as a librarian, it was actually as a preschool teacher. So just stuff I like. I like to tell people about the stuff I like. My favorite library is the Geisel Library at UCSD. I first visited that when I was 6 years old with my older sisters, and I never wanted to leave. And it was hard for me to leave when I finished the PhD. I just love that place. I love iced espresso. You can see all the other things I like as well. I'm a big sci-fi person. And so I'm also a tourist. I'm a tourist of libraries, and I'm a tourist of Pana. And yes, I just love Mexican bread, just like everybody in California. I love libraries, and beach libraries are combined some of the two best things in the planet. Like Provost Del Casino said, my PhD is in communication. I did community-based research for a really long time there, for about 6-7 years. And so I've always been focused on equity issues and community justice in my work. using those frameworks as like a way of thinking about learning design at the community level, and supporting community members in ways that they find relevant. So that's something that I've been doing for a really long time. I love it. I still do it today. That's been kind of a common thread through my different educational experiences. My RTP journey, for anybody out there that's a faculty member, I joined the iSchool back in 2007. I earned tenure promotion back in 2013, and I was promoted to full professor in 2019. So the type of work that I do is just, I guess, I try to achieve synergies with research, teaching, and service between some of these different areas: learning design, new literacies, community-based research, of course, distance education. You know, the School of Information, as you know, is like an all online shop. We have been for many years. And so many of us write about our learning designs for students and about the distance context. And so that's been something that's very much enriched my career, is to think about how to do design in really relevant ways for students, and how to create rich learning contexts and how to design them. Just that thread, just through my own life and my own life experiences, and also my research, community-based research, I've always been very focused on justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion as a foundation for my research and teaching. And that's something that continues today. So let's talk a little bit more about today. So we want to talk about equity-focused data analytics for libraries. So where do we start? You know, there's some key definitions for today. Thinking about libraries as spaces, whether in a library building or out in a community, that serve community members' information needs. And so when we think about digital equity, we're thinking about, and libraries, we're thinking about how libraries can promote the access to information in equitable ways, so that access is distributed in ways across the community that don't leave folks out, you know, that support people that are traditionally under-resourced. And so librarians are very focused on digital equity. And so this issue of data analytics is somewhat new, but we'll be talking more about those definitions. But for now, I just want to talk about libraries as community anchor institutions. So when you think about digital equity, and I'll give you a more detailed definition of that in a second, but thinking about libraries as being community anchor institutions, as institutions that are providing internet access to community members, similar to schools and other community information centers. And so some of the roles that libraries play as community anchors or as information access providers, they're promotive of digital equity. They leverage and provide access to communications infrastructures. They're also involved in disaster response. And so they have these important roles of social cohesion, learning and research, and cultural expression. So libraries as settings have a lot going on, and a lot of missions. There's mission creep all the time for what libraries are doing, could be doing. And they're just really rich environments to study and I guess realize goals for helping people. So when we think about digital equity, there's a bunch of other terms that are sort of connected to those concepts, like the last mile. If we would want to think about, you know, how do we get all the people that are not connected right now? How do we get them connected? Well, the distance between those people that are connected right now and those that aren't, that's the last mile. Libraries are always trying to help us reach that last mile. Another key term is the homework app. And for those of you that have connections to schools, and even in higher education contexts, some of our students don't necessarily have broadband in the home or in their contexts where they're working all the time. And so for them to complete their homework, they may not have the information and communication technology connections that they need to get done what they need to get done. And that's a big issue in K-12 as well. Usually when we're talking about homework gap, we're talking about K-12, but it's a big issue in higher ed context as well. So we want to get everyone connected so that they can complete what they need to do. And so for data analytics and libraries, it's really about using data sets to help us accomplish our missions in more strategic ways. And so this is an infographic that I found from a business that's talking really about business analytics, but I think it's highly relevant. When we're thinking about complex data sets or even like structured data sets, things that are formalized data sets that have been cultivated, or unstructured data sets that are things like maybe social media might be something that you come in contact with all the time that are unstructured. There's a lot of goals that we can achieve with these data sets, and some of them are descriptive, like what's happening in this case with this infographic. It's really about what's going on in my business. But for libraries, it's like what's happening in my library. And so you might have a data set that talks about usage statistics combined with other data sets that communicate information about maybe demographics or the local economy, things like that. We might use it for diagnostic purposes. And we're going to talk in a few minutes about how data sets help us understand the deployment of this new networking technology and some of the challenges there. And so diagnostic can definitely, data sets can tell us why something is happening, especially if you're facing challenges. Data sets can also be analyzed to make predictions. And so that's something that we'll talk about in a few minutes as well. So we wanted to know where we could most successfully deploy this technology, because some of the contexts that we thought it would work in, it didn't. And so data sets helped us explore how to predict future success. And then prescriptive, like what do I need to do? And so what do libraries need to do? I can say, look at all of these data sets, you can combine them and you can come up with projects and activities that libraries could do that would be equity focused and would be promotive of justice, inclusion, improved access. And so that's what libraries are up to, and data analytics can help. And we actually have a new Bachelor of Science program. This is my little plug for our program. And our new faculty member that's running that program, Dr. Shovik Ghosh, he has a great quote that I harvested from our website that says, we want our students to learn how to analyze data, but through a social lens for the benefit of society at large. And so our students will get the opportunity to influence lives and solve social issues. And so that kind of really captures what I've tried to do. I have done something really applied, which is to deploy new networking technology, but then thinking more about data analytics and its relationship to improving my efforts. It's really about this goal of looking through a social lens, an equity lens, and how to benefit our community members. And so I'm trying to do what we're trying to teach our students. So that's, if you want to think about how the skill of information distinguishes itself with regard to data analytics, that's how the social lens, information centers, community information centers as context, stuff like that. And so we've talked a lot about definitions. So we kind of know what libraries are doing, what they want to do with digital equity. And now we're going to jump into this project that I've been working on for several years. Back in 2008, the FCC released these channels that were associated with the old radio frequency spectrum for the old TV channels. And so when they released them for public use, then all of a sudden you could use those spectra, those frequencies, to transmit internet information and data. And so there was this push to design cognitive radios that could propagate internet signals into new geographic spaces. If you had a broadband connection, then you could use these cognitive radios that engineers so brilliantly designed, that's my plug for engineers, to propagate internet signals. And so there's been lots of companies that have been involved in designing radios and base stations and receivers and things like that that make the propagation possible. What has been powerful about TV Whitespace and why it was attractive is that it's not like a traditional line of sight. Like there are different types of radios that can transmit internet signals, but they're line of sight. And so you can be like limited in terms of your ability to deploy things if you are dependent on that line of sight. Now, TV Whitespace has some advantages along those lines. We're talking about channels 14 through 51 of those unused frequencies in the TV band. And so you can propagate those signals into new community spaces. And so if you're a library person, you could have a base station in your library that has a broadband connection in, so your backhaul can be propagated to new community spaces using TV Whitespace frequencies and channels. Okay, and so this is what a community would look like that's lit up with TV Whitespace, and it helps to, extend the library's mission as a community anchor institution in new and exciting ways. And so contexts like the COVID context demonstrate how critical it is that community members have internet access across their communities, not just in the library. And, the COVID is like a special context in terms of it being a pandemic context, but there's other natural disasters where libraries need community access points for populations in crisis. And so it could be anything from like a fire or a really bad storm. And so technology, like equipment associated with TV Whitespace can be actually portable. So you could put a receiver on a trailer and move it around with populations in crisis so they can access the internet in places that are safe for them. Even if the wider community isn't safe, then they might go to like a shelter or something and still have access. And so here's an example of an installation that one of my projects funded. And this is in Beatrice, Nebraska, which is a rural part of Nebraska. And this is basically an antenna that is broadcasting an internet signal to a new community space. And then the community space can receive, and this is an example of a community space that's receiving a signal in a park. And so that enables the community members to create a Wi-Fi hotspot in the community so that people that visit the park can have access to internet. Now you notice that Beatrice, Nebraska, I mentioned, is a really rural place, and it really is. And it's not just that we want to serve rural contexts, but when we talked before about the frequencies that were released by the FCC, they're available to everyone, but there's, like in an urban area, there's a lot of independent broadcasters that want access to those frequencies for their own activities. And so they have registered to use certain channels. And so there's not always channels available in an area. Now, rural spaces are more likely to have channels available. And so that has made TV Whitespace sort of like a happy scenario where the rural spaces need access, and they also have challenges, or excuse me, they also have channels. And so it's great to be able to deploy TV Whitespace, but not all spaces will work, and spaces that you thought should have availability and would be good scenarios for deployment are not always. And so we would find a place that was rural, places in New Mexico that, for example, that we thought would have plenty of channels. And we found that they didn't. There was competition. We also found in some places that were rural, there was too much interference between the channels. Or maybe there were channels, but they weren't contiguous. And so there wasn't enough power from the channel to really propagate signals in effective ways. And so, and of course, there's competition. Even in rural places, there can be competition. So this is a figure of a community in New Mexico. It's a tribal community. And so what you see is this big blob of green surrounded by yellow and some purple. And so green is what you really want to see. It predicts good access to good ability to deploy a TV Whitespace network, and that will be strong, and there's channel availability. So this is what you want to see. But like I said, lots of communities that you would think would look like Torian's community and would be primed for TV Whitespace are not. And so data analytics, you know, I had lots of partners on my grants. Some of them were like the state of New Mexico. Some of them were nonprofits like National Digital Inclusion Alliance, School and Health and Libraries Broadband Coalition, and UC Santa Barbara. Now my UC Santa Barbara partners are really wonderful with data analytics, and they've taught me a lot about extending my thinking about how to deploy new technologies, new information and communication technologies in equity focused ways, because they have their computer science colleagues, and so they have competencies that I don't. And so with overcoming these challenges of saying that we're going to develop a project and we're going to deploy this new technology, it's very unhelpful if you don't know ahead, if you can't predict ahead, like where the technology will work best. And so I wanted to collaborate with them to find out, what the different data sets could tell us that are out there about the prediction of context where it would work. I wanted to know where libraries should focus, because once you have this information, you can say, look, library, you should tell your community that we're an optimal context to deploy this new technology. Community, please give us funds to help us do this for our community members. Just as a reminder, so we want to do descriptive exploration, diagnostic exploration, which we were able to do to understand why these communities weren't working when we would try to deploy the technology. And then we want to predict. So then we want to predict where the technology will work the best, and then prescribe, be prescriptive in terms of libraries should be doing this in this area. It'll work here. It's a good idea. Let's do it. And so, like I mentioned before, we had structured data sets that were geospatial, but we also have data sets that come from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which is a federal agency, and the FCC, of course, about these licensed channels. We didn't work with unstructured data sets for this project, but I can imagine scenarios where libraries might do that. So this is an example. I showed you that beautiful image of Torion that communicated, the signal strength in that community. But I haven't shown you yet how you can search databases that communicate the availability of channels in an area. And so you can see that I have these lists of community spaces with their geospatial coordinates, which I can enter into a TV Whitespace database to understand channel availability. Now in this community, which is in Dulce, New Mexico, we can see that there's a lot of channel availability that's contiguous. And so when I look at that, that tells me, wow, this would be a great community to deploy the technology because the signal strength will be strong. You could even go, like, there are places, even in California, where you could engage with a database like a TV Whitespace channel database and find that there's channels, like you might have channel 14, and then you have channel 30, and then you have channel 45. And you wouldn't know initially that until you went out there and ran a simulation to understand that there's too much noise in those channels that are just sitting there all by themselves because they're surrounded by broadcasters. Or you wouldn't have the power that you need to really propagate internet signals. And so this is an example. It's just another piece of the puzzle, but it's a data set that can be combined with other data sets to tell a data story about the community and the library that's connected to it. So I'm trying to move around my gallery here. This is an image of, so I have the partners at UC Santa Barbara, but I also have corporate partners. Adaptrum Corp is they make equipment for TV Whitespace, but they also do like installs and stuff like that. And one of the places that the field engineer that I've been working with is in Namibia, actually. And he does some great stuff in the African context that's equity focused as well. And so he and other partners at Adaptrum have worked with data sets that we have that are public libraries to give us this initial teaser map. They gave us this teaser that said, look at all the channels that are from like FCC data sets that would be available across the nation in library, public library areas. And so what you can see are areas that are blue have more channel availability, and things that are really dark have very little channel availability. And it's generally it's those urban areas that don't have anything, no availability. And so this was kind of like a teaser to get me thinking about the issue of what data analytics could do to push the projects forward. And so, like I mentioned, I had some key partners. Esther Showalter is a doctoral student there at UC Berkeley. She's great. She's a computer science doctoral student. Dr. Elizabeth Belding, who's I think she's a dean now, but she was a full professor. She is a full professor in the computer science department. She's also very interested in equity-focused networking technology deployment, but also she's very keen on understanding data usage. And so they just, between them, they have a lot of skills and competencies in this area of data analytics. And then, of course, my corporate partners, Adaptrum Corp. Okay, and so for this project, when we started moving in the direction of data analytics, we took 4 data sets. One was a public library survey data that came from IMLS, which again is Institute of Museum and Library Services. And then we had internet access data. We had TV Whitespace channels available and geospatial information about census blocks and populations near libraries and surrounding neighborhoods. And so we've been able to communicate on contiguous channels, which make deployment of TV Whitespace networking technology more feasible and have a greater potential for success. And we can look at the states that are primed with the most channel availability, and as you might expect, rural states like Alaska, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, places like that have lots of channel availability. So some of the tech tools that we used to analyze the data sets was Python 3.9 with pandas and GeoPandas, and QGIS was used to plot the libraries and census blocks as maps. And so there was some smoothing of the data sets that needed to be done as all of those data sets were brought in. And so that was something that was facilitated with those technology tools. And so I think the story here, and just going back to this slide here, the story is really about how you can have an awareness of a new technology, in this case, a new networking technology, but Sometimes, as we know, the technology doesn't always work as we plan it to. And oftentimes you'd be surprised how many data sets are out there. Now, and cultivating relationships is so important. With the corporate data set from Adaptrum, that was not something that was easily available. And so it was something that was just all about relationships, all about partnership to cultivate that data set and connect it to the data sets from IMLS and the geospatial data sets as well. And so thinking more about data storytelling, I mean, as libraries think about which technologies will be primed or could be used most strategically to help their community members, it stands to reason that there's other data storytelling projects that libraries can tell. So a library can say, look, we know from the data sets developed by this project that it'll work in our community. And, you know, it's just strongly evidence-based research that we can take those data sets to make a compelling argument about libraries, communities, and technology, and what we can do to support our community members along the lines of digital equity. But there's libraries, you know, are thinking more and more, and I think that data storytelling so that libraries can advocate for their programs, services, and collections is really gaining momentum. Librarians are generally pretty good with data and data sets. And so this is an example of when I try to share things with people if they want to find out more information. If you're a library person and you're an ALA member, like most of us are, this is a free resource that will help you gain a strong foundation with data storytelling as a component of advocacy for your library. And so there's some fabulous people that have been working on this. Kathleen McDowell, who's an associate professor at Urbana-Champaign. She's at their School of Information Science. Lauren Mueller is the New York State librarian, which is a great person as well. Human Sabari, Tim Sarko, they're both, you know, community technologists and urban planners. Lots of people are working on these issues. The Census Bureau data sets are so powerful to combine with other information and have been inspiring to me. And so that's, if you want to kind of get a more structured foundation for data storytelling for libraries, that would be a great place to start. More stories. Public libraries using data sets in novel ways is also gaining momentum with other federal agencies. My work has been connected strongly to data sets that came from the FCC, but also connected to the Institute of Museum and Library Services, their data sets on public libraries. But the National Center for Data Services of the Network of the National Library of Medicine is also gaining momentum with their own data analytics projects to understand lots of questions. They just came out this year with an internship for students that might be interested in pursuing this direction in their career, which I think would be a fruitful avenue for any young professional. I would say that that's one of the hottest parts of our field right now, is health informatics, health librarianship, stuff like that. So these data sets can help libraries to say, answer questions about, okay, so what are our community members struggling with right now? You might find, like, especially in the COVID context, unfortunately, I was talking with a student about this the other day, about the increase of intimate partner violence in the COVID context. And it's like an unfortunate thing. If we have data sets that describe the challenges that our community members are facing, then we can have an evidence-based rationale for the programming that we want to run. If we know that our community is struggling with intimate partner violence, and librarians can say, to their community stakeholders, look, we would really benefit from funding to support the development of private spaces in the library for community members that are suffering from these challenges. So it's all evidence-based advocacy for your library in lots of different spaces. For academic libraries, I'm really excited about and so as a faculty member, I sort of have two hats. I have like my field that I came from, the library information science field hat, but I also have my faculty hat. One of the fun things I've been able to do is work with the Center of Faculty Development on their faculty training program for online teaching. And they exposed me to the Student Success Dashboard, which is a system-wide effort to chart student success, retention, and persistence. And so libraries for now are not participating in this, but I have a doctoral student coming in to our Gateway PhD program, which is a partnership with Manchester Metropolitan University in the UK. And the student is also a writing faculty member at Cal State Bakersfield. So we're talking about what we could possibly do to try to understand the relationship between library services and student success. And so this is something I'm excited about. If you're out there and you're excited about that too, please connect with me and something new, a new direction that I and a doctoral student are going in. So let me go back. So those are just two avenues where you can think about equity, think about different data sets that are out there, and ask novel questions about the field, ask novel questions about our communities, and try to answer them in really strong evidence-based ways. And so as we embark on our next journey, I just want to thank everyone here today that joined us today. As I mentioned before, I also want to, just thank San Jose State, the people I work with really informally. The university has been a great place, really been good to me. I want to thank my new director at the NECHA has been very supportive of my work. Sandy Hirsch has been a champion of my work. Linda Main has been a champion of my work. And my students have been champions of my work. I hope some of you are here today, and I just want to thank you for attending. It means a lot to me. And so thanks to everyone, and thanks to my partners. Some of them have been copy and pasted here. I do look forward to any new connections I might have with people that are out there or would like to do similar stuff. So please connect with me. And thank you again to everyone who made this day possible. I appreciate being here. So does anybody have any questions?
Well, thank you for a really amazing and informative talk. There are a couple of questions right now in the Q&A, the first of which ties to TVWS and the kind of costs their libraries might incur as a result of some of that. Is it costly? Is it what are the things we need to be thinking about institutionally as we go in a direction like that?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I see Rosario Mireles was asking that. When we did our first round of budgets, for our first deployment, which was in Maine, Nebraska, Georgia, and South Dakota, we budgeted about $15,000 for deployment of a network. And it's still kind of in that range. It depends a lot on what you're trying to achieve in your community and how many new community spaces you would want to deploy to, and whether you want a dedicated internet connection to propagate to new spaces. But somewhere in that $15,000 range, it's cost effective, because once you have the equipment, you don't have to necessarily pay for an additional monthly fee, for example, because the frequencies, the channels are in the public domain. And some of the libraries that are doing CDMA resources, it's more expensive because each unit has a monthly fee. So it can be cost effective for libraries.
There was another question actually popped in the chat that I think is also really interesting, which is how can libraries get grants to add access for communities to get greater internet availability and information availability? I think I would expand that question.
I think that, you know, there was a huge groundswell of funding that came through during the, you know, the pandemic. That was CARES Act grants, you know, that gave, and there's also a lot of funding that goes to the states directly for projects like this. So I would say that the state libraries have their own funds that they distribute for projects like this. There was, you know, the CARES Act grant that came down that was sort of like for like 1 year just to get, you know, try to gain some momentum with internet access. And now, you know, E-rate has an expansion right now that also might provide some funding for new internet connections. Lots of libraries use E-rate funding to get basic broadband, but E-rate has expanded some of its mission so that you can actually propagate some of those signals as well.
That's really interesting. There's a whole, I had a doctoral student when I was at Arizona do an entire thing on technological sovereignty and the way in which people are actually creating their own networks in Barcelona, Spain. I mean, there's a lot of that. It's a very different sort of take. There's another question here on looking at some examples that you might give for novel questions to ask when examining these kind of data sets. So John Evans was just asking, like, how might we think about that? What other projects might, you know, you can't get to, maybe even, you know, that are out there that you're thinking about?
So, you know, that question about how something that like intimate partner violence, it's something that it's in a database somewhere, like in a social services kind of like federal database somewhere about rates of this. That is tied to some sort of geospatial location, which also can be tied to library geospatial location, so that we can understand how librarians could strategically support community members. So the question there is, how can we do more for community members that are experiencing this? How can we be more supportive? Well, an activity like this would say, well, we know that these areas are experiencing this more than other areas. And so that can be just sort of a seed of evidence that you use when you work with stakeholders in your community. Some other questions might be with the student success dashboard. You might just say, well, which classes right now in the CSU system have course guides and outreach materials that have been developed for them? And so what can we say about the student achievement that have courses with these robust materials? Or you can say, well, what course, here's another question. What courses do have the most students that are struggling? And so what can the library do strategically to support courses that with known problems? Like if my students aren't doing well and I'm a faculty member, I might want to know, you know, what can I do to help my students succeed? Well, maybe I should be partnering with the library that can create some innovative materials to help them succeed. And that's something that I would love to do. I think that really captures my imagination, and that role that libraries can play in the student success movement, you know, nationwide across all of the America's universities. So many, you know, the CSU system isn't the only system with student success dashboards and data analytics that are focusing on student success. And so I want libraries to be part of that conversation, and that gets me excited.
Awesome. Well, you had me at geospatial. I am a geographer. So I will say the Savvy Center out of Urban and Regional Planning at San Jose State, one of the projects they did was actually on broadband access. You might want to connect with them. There's an interesting set of connections of geographic information and other types of information and how it moves around the world. And I would explore this a lot, but I want to make sure we get to the question from the student who really wanted to ask you, says, yes, I'm interested in this type of the work, and how, as an MLIS student, can I begin? What can I do now, aside from looking into the NCDS internship? So wants a little insight on what to do.
I love that question. I love EJ. I know EJ is my student. Uh, I think getting started, I mean, students always say, oh, I don't want to do an internship, I'm too busy, but that is a great way to get started, because these fields that are data analytic focused in libraries are very, they're just crying for candidates in their internship programs. I mean, we got an email saying, please send the students to us. We want them. So internships are important. I'm not going to minimize that. There are faculty that would love to be writing and publishing in this area. And the School of Information, we're used to doing distributed research. And so a 289 is a special project that we can collaborate with students on a publication. That would be wonderful. We have courses also that are informatics focused and data analytics focused. And so I think that would be a great opportunity for students as well.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for this talk and for contributing to this lecture series. It's absolutely fantastic to see what you're working on, and also get a sense of all the different intersections that you bring. I mean, what's so interesting about libraries and information science in general is you're working at the hub of all these interconnections, and that's clearly laid out in your work, and there's so much more opportunity. And it's really great to have you working with our colleagues and our students. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you again. I mean, libraries are rich settings because they are crossroads for so many of these issues that have they're robust technologically speaking to execute some of these activities, which is fun too.
Absolutely. So I will thank you on behalf of all the participants who came today, as well as everybody in the Office of the Provost and the library. There's lots of thank yous coming in through the chat right now, but really appreciate the fact that you were able to share what you're working on right now with this audience. It's just absolutely fabulous.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone out there.